My sister forced me and my husband to sit in an isolated arrangement at her engagement party because we're not as wealthy as her fiancé, but her face goes pale when her fiancé comes over to meet my husband and tells her this. You know those moments in life where you witness pure, unadulterated karmic justice? Where someone gets exactly what they deserve, right in front of your eyes. Well, let me tell you, when my own sister tried to humiliate my husband and me in public, she didn't just dig her own grave. She practically built a mansion for herself in it, right there at her own engagement party. My sister, Veronica, is the most two-faced person you will ever meet. On the surface, she's all sweetness and charm, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find a completely different reality. I know this firsthand. We grew up together, and I've seen her true colors more times than I can count. Our childhood wasn't easy. We came from a poor, working-class family. We shared a single blanket in freezing winters, went to bed hungry some nights, and learned to be content with secondhand clothes. Our broken-down house, with its leaky roof and creaking floors, was a constant reminder of our struggles. And as much as I hated it, I know Veronica despised it even more. But how we dealt with that shared hardship couldn't have been more different. I chose to channel my frustration into sheer hard work. I poured everything into my studies, determined to escape the cycle of poverty. And against all odds, I earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. It felt like a miracle. That scholarship became my ticket to a brighter future, to a good education that eventually led to a stable, high-paying job. Once I was settled, I turned my focus back to my family, ensuring our parents, who had sacrificed so much, could finally enjoy a more comfortable life. I helped them move out of that dilapidated house. Veronica, on the other hand, took a very different path. While I focused on self-reliance, she leaned into her looks, her charm, and her cunning nature. She always knew exactly how to use her beauty and wit to her advantage, especially when it came to men. Her strategy was simple: find a man who could give her what she wanted: financial stability, luxury, a place to live. She's mastered the art of securing it all through relationships. I've never seen her struggle to pay a bill because she always had someone taking care of it for her. Her most recent relationship was with a rapper. He paid her bills, bought her expensive shoes, designer clothes, even gave her a place to stay rent-free. She seemed to have it all. But like most of her relationships, it ended in chaos. He caught her cheating on him with one of his house staff, of all people. He was absolutely furious. And when things inevitably fell apart, Veronica did what she always does. She ran to me. She showed up at my doorstep, distraught and desperate, asking to stay until things calmed down. Despite my frustration, despite the obvious mess she had created, I couldn't turn her away. That's our dynamic. She always comes to me in times of trouble, and I, being the older sister, always find it hard to say no. She ended up staying at my house for a month, lying low, avoiding the fallout. My husband, bless his heart, made it clear how much he disliked the situation. He knows Veronica's tendencies, he's seen her drama. But he knows better than to argue with me when it comes to my sister. He grits his teeth and puts up with it, knowing I have a soft spot for her, despite her endless antics. You'd think, after all the times Veronica has come running to me for help, she'd show a little gratitude. But no, Veronica has always been jealous of me. There's this deep-seated resentment she harbors. It's like she can't stand that my life is better, that I found such a good, loyal husband. She's even told me outright that she finds it unfair that I live such a stable, comfortable life without ever worrying about money. What she doesn't understand, what she refuses to understand, is that I worked my ass off to get here. She hates hearing about my husband taking me on fancy vacations, and she never misses an opportunity to remind me that she thinks I don't deserve any of it. Just for some context, my husband comes from a very wealthy family, but you'd never guess it. We met at a conference. He was a guest speaker. I had no idea how financially successful he was. He looked so simple, so humble. That's what attracted me to him. No designer suits, no flashy cars, no expensive watches. He once told me, showing off isn't my style, and that mindset made me fall for him even harder. When we started seriously dating, I realized the extent of his wealth. Beyond his family's fortune, he'd quietly built his own through years of smart decisions and hard work. Even after we married, we made a point not to broadcast his wealth to my family. Yes, We moved into a larger house, but we kept most other aspects of our life understated. Aside from helping my parents, and, occasionally, Veronica when they truly needed it, we rarely talked about money. My husband believes in living modestly, and I respect that. It was also partly because I knew how Veronica would react. She already felt entitled to our help. If she fully understood the extent of my husband's wealth, she'd likely see us as her personal safety net. So, after her relationship with the rapper imploded, I assumed Veronica would take some time to reflect. Maybe even stay single for a while. But no, in true Veronica fashion, she quickly found herself another man. This time, though, things were different, or so it seemed. Her new guy, James, was a senior account manager at his company, someone who had built a solid career and was doing quite well. At first, I honestly thought he was just a rebound, someone to fill the gap until her next conquest. But then, Veronica surprised all of us by actually getting serious about him. She bragged about his sports car and his rich parents constantly. Then one day, she invited my parents and me to lunch with James for an official introduction. During this lunch, she let it slip that her decision to be with James wasn't entirely about love. According to her, James was somewhat rich and very important, and she wanted to secure her future by locking him down. She was so open about wanting a part of his wealthy lifestyle. As if that wasn't bad enough, before James arrived, Veronica explicitly told us not to mention anything about our poor childhood. She instructed us to act as though we came from a family with good money and status. She'd lied to James about our background, not wanting him to know how poor we used to be. She also forbade us from talking about any of her exes, claiming she told James she had no experience in relationships. I was appalled. She had lied about everything, and she wanted us to keep up the facade just so she could marry this rich boy. I didn't want to lie to James. He deserved to know the truth. But Veronica argued that once she was married, she would tell him everything. Until then, she insisted it was her decision. I hated the situation, but for the sake of keeping the peace, I kept my mouth shut. During the lunch, it became clear just how smitten James was with Veronica. Despite only knowing her for 7 months, he seemed utterly devoted. He was polite and respectful towards my parents and me, repeatedly expressing how much he wanted to marry her. My parents, swept up in the moment and likely eager for Veronica to settle down, gave him their blessing right then and there. I felt really bad for the guy. He didn't deserve to be deceived like this. Not even a week passed before they officially announced their engagement. Yes, you read that right. My relationship-hopping sister, the woman who never seemed to stay with one man for long, was planning to get married. At first, I let myself believe it was a genuine change. Maybe she had grown up, learned from her past, and found real love with James. I was happy for her, truly. I even allowed myself a sliver of hope that this could mark a turning point in her life. Veronica seemed over the moon. For once, she appeared genuinely excited about starting this new chapter. She wasted no time planning their engagement party, inviting my husband and me. It was meant to be a grand event, and my husband, who hadn't met James yet, was curious to finally meet the man who had captured my sister's attention. When we arrived at the party, it was immediately clear exactly why Veronica wanted to marry this guy. James had spared no expense. The venue was beautiful, meticulously planned. Professional caterers, servers in formal attire, assigned seating at elegant tables adorned with floral centerpieces. It was polished, extravagant, far more elaborate than I had anticipated. As we entered, I quickly spotted my parents, already seated closer to the center of the room. They waved us over enthusiastically, but before we could make our way to them, Veronica intercepted us. She stopped us in our tracks and told us that our assigned table wasn't near our parents. Then, without further explanation, she escorted my husband and me to a table tucked away in a far corner of the room. It seemed secluded, noticeably less decorated than the others. She motioned for us to sit, informing us this was our table for the evening. My husband and I exchanged confused glances. I was completely taken aback. My husband, ever direct, asked Veronica why we were being seated so far away from our parents, and even from her and James. With a dismissive tone, she snapped that she only wanted well-to-do people seated near her and James's family. My husband and I exchanged stunned glances. Her reasoning was as insulting as it was nonsensical. We were both financially stable, and Veronica knew that perfectly well. But she didn't stop there. Smoking, she added with a sneer. Her fiancé's family was richer than anyone she'd ever met, and since we weren't on their level, she decided we didn't deserve to be anywhere near them. The sheer arrogance and venom in her words left us speechless, but it also made one thing crystal clear. Veronica wanted to humiliate us. Her comment wasn't just insulting, it was cruel. She was basically trying to insinuate that my husband and I were beneath her and her fiancé's family, that we didn't measure up to the prestige or wealth she thought they represented. The smirk on her face made it painfully obvious she was enjoying every second of it. Before I could even gather my thoughts to respond, Veronica turned, as if to leave, smugly confident that she'd had the last word. But then James appeared. He must have spotted us talking to her and came over to greet us. James greeted me warmly and then turned to my husband. The moment James saw him, his face lit up with surprise. "Wow, Mr. Hamilton, what are you doing here?" he exclaimed, visibly excited. It was clear he recognized my husband, and his reaction caught both Veronica and me completely off guard. She froze, her smirk fading into confusion as James continued, his tone filled with admiration. I glanced at my husband, who seemed calm but slightly amused by the unexpected turn of events. He hadn't met James until that evening, but now he seemed to recognize him. The two men shook hands, and my husband told James he was married to me. James seemed pleasantly surprised by that, saying he couldn't believe he was going to be family with someone he'd admired for so long. Veronica, on the other hand, looked like she was swallowing a lemon. Whatever connection my husband had with James, it was clearly a significant one, and Veronica had absolutely no idea. James then turned to Veronica and casually mentioned that his company had been working under my husband's company for years. In fact, he explained, my husband's company was one of their biggest clients, and James and his team personally managed the account. He seemed proud as he explained how often my husband's company used their services, clearly holding my husband in high regard. That was the moment. Veronica's face drained of color. Her eyes widened as the realization hit her. Just minutes earlier, she had gone out of her way to demean us, smugly claiming we weren't as rich or important as her fiancé. Now, she was confronted with the truth that her very fiancé worked for my husband's company. The vindication I felt at that moment was indescribable. It was like a karmic gift served on a silver platter. My husband remained composed, but I could tell he found the irony of the situation as satisfying as I did. James, seemingly oblivious to the tension, then asked us a straightforward question. "Why are you sitting so far away from the rest of us?" I looked at Veronica, who looked terrified that we were going to expose her. And without missing a beat, I told James the truth. "Well, this is where Veronica wanted us to sit." James looked genuinely taken aback. He turned to Veronica, concern etched on his face, and asked, "Why would you make your own sister and her husband sit all the way over here?" Veronica looked as pale as a ghost. She stumbled over her words, clearly caught off guard. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. It was as though she was struggling to think of an explanation that wouldn't make her look terrible in front of James. Before Veronica could come up with an excuse, I decided to speak up. I calmly explained to James the reason behind our seating arrangement. I told him how Veronica had mentioned that we weren't rich enough to sit near them or the other well-to-do guests. Veronica immediately tried to interrupt, stammering protests, but I continued, recounting everything she had told me and my husband earlier. I didn't exaggerate or sugarcoat. I just laid the truth out plainly. James's expression turned from confusion to disbelief, and then to absolute mortification. He looked absolutely appalled as he turned to Veronica, who by now was visibly panicking. "That's totally inappropriate," he told her, his tone sharp with disappointment. Then, turning back to us, he began apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry for what happened," he said, clearly embarrassed. "I'll fix this right now. Let me have you move to a better table near us." While I appreciated his apology, my husband had already made up his mind. He's not one to let insults slide easily, especially when they're as deliberate and hurtful as this. Without hesitation, he announced that we wouldn't be staying any longer. "I appreciate the gesture, James," my husband said politely, "but we are leaving." I nodded in agreement, ready to go. James looked flustered and tried to reason with my husband, but it was no use. Veronica, too, began apologizing frantically, insisting it was a misunderstanding and begging us to stay. But the damage was done. What was the point of staying after what Veronica had done? Sure, she seemed apologetic now, but would she have felt any guilt if James hadn't turned out to work for my husband? I doubted it. My husband and I quietly excused ourselves and left the party. Instead of dwelling on the negativity, we decided to turn the evening into something positive. We went to our favorite restaurant for an impromptu date night, just the two of us. It was so refreshing to leave behind the drama and spend quality time together, enjoying good food and each other's company. That said, my husband remains furious about the incident. He's made it clear he wants to cut ties with my sister entirely. And honestly, I can't say I blame him. Veronica's behavior was deeply disrespectful, not just to him, but to me as well. At this point, I agree with my husband. Family or not, there's only so much one can tolerate, and Veronica had crossed that line. Since the party, my phone has been ringing nonstop. It feels like everyone suddenly has an opinion about what happened, without even knowing the full story. My parents, along with some relatives who were present, seemed particularly upset. They only saw my husband and me leaving the engagement party abruptly with no explanation. Instead of questioning Veronica or digging deeper, they decided to place the blame squarely on us. They've been calling us rude and disrespectful, berating us for walking out on such an important event. It's frustrating, to say the least. Meanwhile, Veronica has been bombarding me with texts. Her tone is completely different now. She's sending what feels like endless apologies, claiming she regrets what happened and begging me to call her back. Apparently, James is furious with her, and they've had a big fight over the incident. He's insisting that she make things right with us, which, I suppose, is why she's suddenly so remorseful. It's not about reconciliation for the sake of family. It's about her trying to save face before her fiancé turns his back on her and ends their relationship. And to be honest, I agree with most people who've heard the story. My sister needs a lesson in humility. If I accept her apology now, she will never learn. She's only apologizing because she's afraid of losing James, not because she's actually sorry for the way she treated me and my husband. And frankly, James deserves to know the full truth about my sister, about her true behavior, before he makes any deeper commitments. It's important he understands what kind of person she is, especially if she's planning to spend the rest of her life with him. While I'm not one to meddle in people's personal lives, I can't stand by and let her manipulate everyone around her, especially when she's hurt me so deeply. So my husband and I decided to take matters into our own hands. We invited James to our place for lunch. He had actually been reaching out to my husband, apologizing profusely for the situation, so we thought a face-to-face conversation would be best. I felt it was time for him to hear the whole truth, not just the version Veronica had been feeding him. Earlier this week, I also spoke with my parents. I explained everything that went down at the engagement party in detail. They were horrified. I could tell it really shook them to realize how their daughter had treated me and my husband. My parents, especially my mother, were deeply regretful for judging us before knowing the whole story, and they immediately apologized. Since then, they've assured me they are going to set the record straight with the rest of the family. They want to make sure that no one else blames me for what happened. They understand now that the problem wasn't me, it was Veronica's behavior. I truly appreciate their support. A few days ago, James came over. He apologized again for how Veronica had treated us, acknowledging how wrong it was for her to try and humiliate us. He told us he never would have let her go through with it if he'd had any idea that she was going to treat us that way. James pleaded with my husband, asking him not to bring this up to his boss, as it could seriously jeopardize his career. My husband, ever the professional, reassured James that despite how my sister had insulted us, their business partnership would remain unaffected. James seemed visibly relieved by that, and I appreciated my husband's calmness amidst all this drama. It was important to him that business didn't get entangled in his personal mess, and I respected that. Once that was settled, I took it upon myself to be completely transparent with James about who my sister really was. I didn't want to meddle in his relationship, but I felt he had every right to know the truth about Veronica's past. He needed to understand what kind of person she was before making any long-term commitments. I told him everything. How she had been in and out of messy situations, how she had a string of shady exes, how she has never really held down a job, and how she constantly came to us for money, often without any real intention of changing her ways. I wasn't trying to break them up or create conflict, but I wasn't going to sit back and watch James make a decision based on an incomplete picture. I made sure to add that I was happy for him to be a part of our family, but I wanted him to truly know what he was getting into. Veronica may have been charming in the beginning, but she had a pattern of using people and then tossing them aside when they no longer served her purpose. James listened carefully. While he seemed shocked by some of what I said, he didn't react with anger or defensiveness. He told me that he had no idea about her past or about her family background, since Veronica had made such elaborate lies. In the end, he informed me that he was going to take some space from Veronica to process everything I had shared. He didn't want to rush into anything, and I could tell he was trying to make sense of what was going on. It was clear he had a lot to think about. At that moment, I felt relieved that I had done my part by being honest with James. Ultimately, I hope he makes the right choice, both for his own sake and for the sake of everyone involved. Just hours after James left our place, my phone rang. It was my sister, and she was screaming at me. I could barely make sense of what she was saying through her angry sobs and shouts, but it quickly became clear. James had called off their engagement. Apparently, he had called her to confront her about some of the lies she had told him. But instead of owning up to them, she refused to take any responsibility, just doubling down on her falsehoods. He also told her that she didn't know how to conduct herself in public and wasn't mature enough to be his wife. When she tried to argue, he shut her down, telling her he couldn't marry her because she had lied to him too many times. He was finished. He made it crystal clear that he no longer saw a future with her. My sister was, understandably, livid. She was furious, yelling at me that I was the reason she lost him. She went on and on about how James was her golden ticket to a better life, a life of higher status and wealth, and that marrying him would have changed her life and given her everything she ever wanted. She said I ruined her chance at a good life. I wasn't surprised by her reaction. As usual, she blames everyone else other than herself for how her life turns out. But this time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me or use me to get what she wanted any longer. I calmly but firmly told her that I didn't care how much she yelled at me anymore because I was done with her. I told her that my husband and I were cutting her off. No more helping her, no more handouts, no more bailing her out of whatever mess she created. This time, she had gone too far, and I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. When I said that, there was an immediate silence on the other end of the line. She had nothing to say in response. I could almost feel her panic through the phone. It was like I had finally said the thing that she knew was coming, but never expected to actually hear. I told her that for years, I had let her disrespect slide because I knew, deep down, that she was jealous of me. I knew she was trying to tear me down, but I always let it go because, in a way, I understood why she felt that way. She was my younger sister, and I wanted to look out for her. But this time, she had crossed the line. She had humiliated us. She had humiliated my husband, and I couldn't let her get away with it. My husband had been nothing but kind to her, even though he didn't particularly like her, and he had always supported her whenever she needed something. He had done all of that because he loved me, and she had completely taken advantage of that. I told my sister, in no uncertain terms, that she didn't deserve people like us in her life anymore. I made it clear that if she ever showed up at our door asking for help again, we wouldn't even acknowledge her presence. She was completely on her own from here on out. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She tried to argue, pulling the "I'm still your family" card, trying to guilt-trip me into backing down. She argued how she didn't really mean those insulting words, and that we could just forget about the whole thing and start all over again, now that James and her were done. But I wasn't going to fall for it. I scoffed and told her I was done and hung up the phone. It was time to end the cycle. Since that call, both my husband and I have blocked her from our phones, social media, everything. We've also made it clear to my parents and other relatives that we don't want any of them reaching out to us to change our minds about my sister. If they do, they'll be cut off as well. There are no more second chances, no more excuses for her behavior. Veronica is no longer a part of our lives, and I'm at peace with that. It's sad that it had to come to this, but sometimes you just have to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they're family. What do you think? Was I too harsh, or did I do the right thing? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.